parents rejected me for my brother's girlfriend, then found out I signed her paychecks. The first time I realized I wasn't the favorite child, I was 7 years old. My brother Jason had just won his Little League championship, and my parents threw him a party that rivaled a small wedding. Banners, professionally catered food, and even a custom-made trophy case installed in our living room that same weekend. When I won the state science fair 3 weeks later, I got a pat on the head and a set. "That's nice, Ellie," before my mother asked if I'd done the dishes yet. It was the first lesson in a lifetime of them. My achievements would always be footnotes in the grand story of my family. I was too ambitious, they said. Always with that slight grimace, as if ambition in a daughter was some kind of birth defect they'd learned to tolerate. Too opinionated, too different. My father would joke at family gatherings that I was the changeling who must have been swapped at the hospital, while my mother would quickly change the subject whenever her friends asked what I was doing these days. "Ellie's still finding herself," she'd say with a tight smile. No matter how many times I told her about my growing tech startup, I stopped telling them after a while. What was the point? They'd already written my story in their minds. The disappointment, the odd one out, the daughter who couldn't quite measure up to their expectations. So I kept my head down and poured all that rejected energy into building something of my own. I'd always been good with computers. The logical systems made sense to me in a way that family dynamics never did. My college roommate and I started coding in our dorm room, building an enterprise software solution that streamlined supply chain management. Within 3 years, we'd secured our first major client. By year 5, we were turning down acquisition offers. The day we hit our first million in revenue, I bought myself a bottle of champagne and drank it alone in my apartment, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in shades of gold. I didn't call my parents. I didn't even text my brother. What would I say? "Hey, remember that weird hobby you all made fun of? Turns out it's worth millions now." So I stayed quiet as Vertex Flow grew from a startup into a legitimate tech powerhouse. I made a conscious decision early on to stay out of the spotlight. I hired Diane, a charismatic former sales executive, to be the public face of the company, while I remained the nameless, faceless founder who made the real decisions behind the scenes. My name appeared on legal documents, of course, but I used Winters professionally and avoided press photos or industry events where my identity might be compromised. It wasn't about playing games. It was about peace. I'd learned the hard way that success didn't change how my family saw me. It just gave them new ways to be disappointed when I didn't succeed in the exact way they'd envisioned. And that system worked perfectly until the day my brother called to say he was bringing his new girlfriend to Sunday dinner and that I should make an effort because this one was special. "Her name is Maya," he told me, his voice practically vibrating with pride. "Maya Reeves. She works for some elite tech company. Very hush-hush, but she's on the fast track there. You'll like her. She's in your field, sort of." I remember freezing with my phone against my ear, a strange, prickling sensation crawling up my spine. Maya Reeves. The name was familiar, but I couldn't immediately place it. We had over 400 employees now, and while I reviewed all the senior hires personally, I couldn't keep track of everyone. "Sounds great," I said, non-committal. Looking forward to it. I wasn't. Family dinners were exercises in emotional endurance at the best of times, but I went anyway. Armed with my usual defenses, a bottle of wine my father would call too fancy but drink anyway, a new sweater my mother would find some subtle flaw in, and the practiced smile that never quite reached my eyes. The moment I walked in, I knew something was different. There was an energy in the house I hadn't felt since Jason brought home his college acceptance letter. My mother had prepared a roast, not the dry pork chop she usually served when I came over, but the prime rib she reserved for special occasions. My father had uncorked one of the bottles from his special collection. And there, sitting in what had always been my seat at the table, was Maya. I recognized her immediately. Maya Patel, who went by Maya Reeves professionally, a mid-level project manager who joined Vertex Flow's client implementation team about 6 months ago. She was good at her job, from what I'd heard, but had already developed a reputation for taking credit for team successes while deflecting individual failures. She looked up as I entered, a flash of something, recognition, confusion, crossing her face before it settled back into a polished smile. "You must be Ellie," she said, rising to greet me with a perfectly manicured hand extended. "Jason has told me so much about you. I doubted that very much. Jason and I barely spoke these days, except when obligated by family functions. But I shook her hand and smiled back, wondering if she'd make the connection between Ellie Winters and EJ Winters, the reclusive CEO whose signature appeared on her employment contract. She didn't. Of course she didn't. Why would she? As far as Maya was concerned, I was just the awkward sister of her new boyfriend, the family oddball who did something with computers but never seemed to advance. Maya was just telling us about her work, my mother said, her voice carrying that rare note of genuine interest she never used when discussing my career. It sounds so impressive. Oh, it's nothing, really, Maya said with a practiced modesty that made my teeth clench. I lead a specialized implementation team at a tech firm. Very cutting-edge stuff. Actually, we just landed a major client that should put us on track to dominate the market. I nearly choked on my wine. Vertex Flow had indeed just secured a contract with a Fortune 50 manufacturing company, a deal I'd personally worked on for months. Maya's team would be handling part of the implementation, yes, but she'd had nothing to do with landing the client. That's amazing, my father said, beaming at her like he'd never beamed at me. Not even when I graduated summa cum laude. You know, Ellie here does some computer work too, but nothing on that scale, right, Ellie? There it was. The familiar sting, sharper now, with Maya sitting there, wearing a knowing smile as if we shared a secret about my mediocrity. Just freelancing, I said quietly, the lie bitter on my tongue. Nothing special. You should really talk to Maya about opportunities at her company, my mother suggested, patting my hand with a condescending sympathy that made me feel 7 years old again. I'm sure someone with your basic skills could find an entry-level position. Couldn't she, Maya? Maya's smile widened, confident and just a touch predatory. We're always looking for support staff, she said, in a tone that managed to be both generous and dismissive at once. I could put in a word with HR. I looked at her, really looked at her, and wondered what she would do if I told her right then that I didn't need her help getting a job at Vertex Flow, that I'd signed off on her hiring, that her last performance review had noted her tendency towards self-promotion at the expense of team cohesion. But I said nothing, just smiled and nodded and took another sip of wine. You should be grateful, Jason said later, as I was preparing to leave. Maya doesn't offer to help just anyone. She's going places, fast track to executive leadership, she says. Might even run the company someday. I looked at my brother, this stranger who shared my blood but had never bothered to understand my dreams, and felt a wave of something between pity and anger. That would be something, I said quietly, thinking of the company I'd built from nothing, the company Maya thought she might run someday. Really something. I drove home that night with my knuckles white on the steering wheel, replaying Maya's casual lies and my family's adoring reactions. For years, I told myself that staying in the shadows was about peace, about avoiding unnecessary drama. But as I pulled into my building's garage, I had to confront an uncomfortable truth. Part of me had always hoped that one day, somehow, my success would force my family to see me differently. Now, watching them fawn over Maya, over the very things I'd actually accomplished, I realized how foolish that hope had been. They would never see me, not really. They'd already decided who I was, long ago. I walked into my penthouse apartment, the one my parents had never visited because they thought I shouldn't waste money on rent, and looked out at the city lights. Something had shifted inside me. A quiet resolve taking root. I didn't need their approval, I never had. But perhaps it was time they learned exactly who their disappointing daughter had become. That first dinner with Maya was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, something fundamental changed in my already strained relationship with my family. What had once been passive disappointment evolved into active exclusion. It started with a missed call on a Thursday evening. When I phoned back, my mother answered with obvious surprise in her voice. "Oh, Ellie, did you need something?" "You called me," I reminded her. "About 20 minutes ago." "Did I?" A pause. "Oh, I meant to call about Sunday dinner, but actually don't worry about it. Maya mentioned she's bringing some colleagues over, tech people like her. We thought it might be awkward for you." The implication hung between us. I wasn't on Maya's level. I would embarrass them. "I see," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Another time then." But another time never seemed to materialize when Maya was around. Suddenly, my standing invitation to Sunday dinners evaporated. My mother would call only when she knew Maya was traveling for work. "Maya's in Seattle this weekend," she'd say, as if that explained everything. "You can come if you want." I'd arrive to find the energy in the house dimmed, the special tablecloth tucked away, the prime rib replaced with chicken casserole. My father would make half-hearted conversation, inevitably steering toward Maya's latest accomplishment. "She's being considered for senior management," he'd say proudly, as if speaking about his own daughter. Presented some revolutionary new approach to their supply chain system. I nearly laughed out loud at that one. I'd seen Maya's presentation. It was a rehashed version of a framework I'd developed 2 years ago, with some superficial changes to the interface. She'd claimed it as her original work. "That's impressive," I said, pushing peas around my plate. "You know," my mother interjected, her tone shifting to that particular brand of helpful criticism she'd perfected over the years. "Maybe you should ask Maya to mentor you. She's doing real work, Ellie, making an impact." The casual cruelty of it stung more than I wanted to admit. 20 years of building my company from nothing of revolutionizing an entire industry, reduced to not real work because they couldn't see beyond their own narrow expectations. "I'm doing fine, Mom," I said quietly. "Are you, though?" My father frowned. "Jason says you're still doing that freelancing thing. At your age, you should be establishing yourself, like Maya." I met his eyes and saw nothing but genuine concern there, which somehow made it worse. They truly believed I was failing. They genuinely thought Maya, who occupied a mid-level position in my company, was so far above me that I should aspire to be her protege. The irony would have been comical if it didn't hurt so much. The exclusion extended beyond dinners. Family gatherings, holiday celebrations, even casual coffee meetups, all suddenly organized around Maya's schedule, with my invitation contingent on her absence. I became the family secret, trotted out only when the golden couple wasn't available. At one particularly painful Christmas Eve, I arrived bearing carefully selected gifts only to find Maya sitting in my usual spot, wearing a sweater identical to one I'd owned in college, a sweater my mother had once called too corporate, and trying too hard. "Doesn't she look professional?" my mother whispered to me. "Like a real businesswoman." I smiled and nodded, swallowing the words that threatened to escape. I own a company worth 9 figures. I sign the paychecks of 372 employees. I am the businesswoman you always wanted me to be. Instead, I watched Maya hold court, spinning tales about her executive responsibilities and the special projects she was entrusted with, due to her exceptional talent. Most of what she described was either exaggerated or outright fabricated. The special project she mentioned had actually been assigned to her as a remedial exercise after she'd fumbled a client presentation. "Ellie," Jason said suddenly, interrupting my thoughts, "what exactly are you doing these days? Still, websites and stuff?" The table fell silent. Every eye turned to me, a mixture of pity and faint embarrassment in their expressions. Maya's gaze was particularly keen, professionally curious, but with an undercurrent of satisfaction. I could have told them then, could have ended the charade with a few simple sentences. "I am the founder and CEO of Vertex Flow. I built it from nothing. Maya works for me." But something stopped me. Perhaps it was pride, or perhaps a deeper realization that no revelation would fundamentally change how they saw me. The disappointment was too deeply ingrained, the narrative too comfortable for them to abandon. "Just the usual," I said lightly. "Getting by." Maya smiled, triumphant yet magnanimous in her victory. "My offer still stands," she said. "I could put in a word at my company. Entry level, of course, but it's a foot in the door." I thanked her, the words tasting like ash in my mouth, and excused myself early, claiming a headache. No one tried very hard to make me stay. My decision to remain anonymous within my own company wasn't made on a whim. 7 years ago, when Vertex Flow secured its first major funding round, our PR team pushed for me to become the public face of the company. "Female tech founder makes good" was a narrative they were eager to capitalize on. For a brief moment, I considered it. The recognition, the validation, the magazine covers and speaking engagements that would finally prove to my family that I wasn't the failure they believed me to be. But then came the memory of my 16th birthday, when I'd proudly shown my father an app I'd built.